Oh, hi there. Didn't hear you coming up. I was just looking out over this majestic vista. Been in the Bounder a month now, and I've learned some things. I think I'm gonna say a word or two about that. Hi there, my name's Jeff. I live in a 30-year-old Class A motorhome with my girlfriend and my cat. When I started making this video, I had been doing this for a month. Now I've been doing it for more than 4 months. During that time, we put 4,000 miles on the motorhome as we traveled across the country. We've got a 1992 Fleetwood Bounder that's a 35-foot diesel pusher, meaning it's got a diesel engine mounted in the rear of the vehicle. I had no prior experience RVing. My girlfriend suggested doing this. I considered it, decided that I thought it made sense for us, and 3 months later, we had purchased our motorhome and we're living out of it. So I'll tell you how I spent the 3 months preparing for this undertaking. After we decided to do this, I just absorbed all the information I could from the internet every day for 2 months. I got a rough understanding of the main points of RVing and also learned how to evaluate the quality of a used RV. It was at this point that we decided to start actually searching for a used rig, and this fortunately only took a couple weeks. I think I might make a separate video at some point talking about the general process we followed when looking for a used rig, since I think it helped us to handle this step quickly and effectively. After we bought it, we spent 1 more month preparing the motorhome before getting out on the road. So it took us 3 months' time from saying, let's do this, to actually doing it. I think that's pretty speedy. So we were able to get this done in 3 months because I focused almost all my attention to it, on it during that time. Helped along by my interests, prior experience, the people around me, and also our willingness to climb up a somewhat painful and steep learning curve. I'm sure it's possible to do it even quicker, and of course some people may well choose to take much more time to plan it out. You kind of have to find the balance that works for you, I guess. So yeah, that covers the timeline aspect. I think probably most people watching this will have some rough notion of what it might be like to live out of an RV. So I'm going to cover the stuff that really surprised me when I got to actually doing it. Those things that weren't well represented in my idealized view of how it would be. So without further ado, here are the top 10 things I learned from practical experience. First, leveling. Let me tell you, leveling is a simple concept. You get your RV level so that your fridge works. Traditionally, RVs have absorption fridges that need to be on level ground to work properly and to keep from destroying themselves. The technology is both pretty old and pretty cool. I won't go into it here, but RVs have used these instead of typical residential compressor fridges for years because they can run more easily off of propane and because they have no moving parts to get shaken apart as your RV flies down the road. Anyway, I thought leveling would be a pain but easy enough to figure out, and that sort of turned out to be true, but it doesn't really capture it. You get level by driving some of your tires up onto blocks to compensate for any slant. Not so bad. And it isn't, but it's pretty easy to get to spots that are so unlevel that you really can't get level. You either don't have enough stuff to jam under your wheels, or you don't feel safe lifting them as high as you need to. And I've also had trouble at times getting my heavy Class A motorhome to want to produce enough torque to climb up onto these blocks. Probably the biggest nervous breakdown moment I've had yet came when we were camping just south of Joshua Tree National Park. I think we were only about a month in at that point, maybe even a little less. We were at a cool spot that I could actually get level at, and the thing was, I could only do it if I put the RV east to west. And it turned out that in a few days the winds kicked up from the north and started hitting us smack in the broadside, shaking us like a boat on the ocean. They were probably 20, 30 mile an hour winds, and it was kind of cool, actually, but then we got the news that 65-mile-an-hour gusts were rolling in, so we figured for our own comfort, if not our own safety, we'd better turn the rig into the wind to keep the winds from smacking us square in the side. And I think it was a good idea, but it turned out there was just no way to get level facing into the wind. It just wasn't going to happen because of the way that the land was sloped. So after hours and hours of trying and a lot of profanity, we decided it wasn't going to work, tossed everything in the fridge and freezer into a cooler with some ice, and just brushed our hands off, called it a day. I should say that most, if not all, modern Class A RVs have some type of leveling jack system that makes this process easier. Ours does not. It was an option 30 years ago when our RV was made, and the original purchaser didn't get the option. Also, when it comes to leveling, the devil is really in the details. I want to stress that. You'll have to determine what device you will use to measure whether you're level, what specific surface in the RV you want to get level, what device you'll use to raise your tires. There's a bunch that you can choose from, and how exactly you want to orient your RV to make leveling easier. None of this is too hard, and it's not, it's not that bad, but if you're a newbie like me, I'd give this some good thought before you're out in the dirt trying to figure it out for the first time. I might make a more detailed video on this topic somewhere down the road, but for now, I won't get into the weeds any further than I already have. All right, number 2. This is a force of nature that I gained a new appreciation for: the wind. Pretty windy. This one's kind of specific to the southwestern United States in winter and spring. I mentioned this a little bit when I was talking about leveling, but it deserves more attention. The wind is not an aspect of the weather that I previously paid a ton of attention to, unless it meant a tornado or a hurricane was on its way. But out in the desert, the wind has been so intense, and so frequently so, that it has demanded consideration. Even though it seems to rarely, if ever, get to the point that it poses a tip risk, at least when the RV is stationary, it's often been windy enough to make working on and under the RV a real pain. Depending on the location and the severity of the wind, it can kick up a dust storm. I had this happen when I was changing the oil and the coolant on my sedan, which is our tow vehicle. But even if you're not in a dust storm, the wind can be enough to blow your things around and generally make it unpleasant to be outside. Also, if you're going to be driving a big motorhome, you want to be careful because the wind can really blow these things around while you're driving. So now I keep a close eye on the wind forecast whenever I'm in a place where I think it might be windy. I personally don't love trying to sleep when the RV is rocking a lot from the wind. One thing that helps a great deal here is to park with the front of the vehicle pointed into the wind, if you can manage it. For number 3, I'll talk a little about a universal concern for dry campers everywhere: water usage. I knew coming in that water would be a precious resource to manage since we plan to be dry camping most of the time. We have a 100-gallon freshwater tank, a 47-gallon gray water tank, and a 59-gallon black tank. We wanted that 100-gallon freshwater tank so that we could boondock for long stretches, and it's been nice to have for that purpose. What surprised me is that the freshwater tank is rarely the choke point for water management. Almost always is the gray tank. We typically fill that up far before we use all of our fresh water. Fortunately, I've found that we have a decent amount of flexibility when it comes to the gray tank. The main water inputs for that tank are showering and dishes in that order of relevance. And we can get much more life out of the gray tank by optimizing our washing techniques. So that's Navy showers and using as little water as possible when washing dishes. And also by showering less and doing less dishes, but we cook a lot and like to take fairly regular showers, so we usually don't go too crazy here unless we have to. I'd say we can easily go a week without being particularly careful. A week and a half if we are being careful, and 2 weeks if we are being very conservative. For number 4, I've got some thoughts on another common consideration for RVers: how long you stay in a given place. My current inclination is to try to spend a week or 2 at each destination. A big part of this for us is that it's just easier to not have to be setting up and breaking down camp all the time. Our systems aren't too streamlined in this respect, though we've been slowly improving this. If we get to the point where it's very easy to break down and set up camp, maybe I'll feel differently, but I kind of doubt it. It's just nice to be able to relax in a place for a while. I like driving the motorhome, but moving is a bit of work. Another aspect of this, and this is circumstance specific for us, is that we usually can't get out sightseeing, hiking, whatever, very much during the weekdays because we've got competing demands on our time. So we sometimes need a little longer to really enjoy a place. When you're gonna stick around for that long though, I mean a week or 2, you do have to make sure that the place is going to be one that you're actually going to want to stay at. Online research can go a long way here. I would say that it's not too hard to find places that are good enough, but as far as finding spots that you really like, I'm getting to feel that there's no replacement for trial and error. I don't think we've had to camp anywhere truly terrible, but we've certainly camped for longer than I would have liked at some places that I didn't really care for, and for shorter than I would have liked at places that turned out to be awesome. If you can build flexibility into your schedule, that's great, but that's not possible if you need to reserve a campsite, and there are other reasons why sometimes you just can't keep flexible. And that brings me to the point that, of course, sometimes we stop at a place just to rest on the way from point A to point B without any intention of staying there for any length of time. I like to keep it to a single night when doing this so that we can get away with leaving the motorhome mostly packed up and don't have to go through the work of fully repacking it when we move. Sometimes there are things at these places that are worth sticking around a little longer for, but you get the idea. We do a decent number of these stopovers because, as I'll get to in a moment, we like to keep the miles down that we travel in any given day. Okay, number 5. I don't like to drive for more than 200 miles in a single day. This is a benchmark that people often mention, and I think it's been useful for us. But like many things, it's going to be circumstance dependent. I don't drive the Bounder very fast at all. So it usually takes me significantly longer to get somewhere than it would if you were just driving in a regular vehicle. So, 200 miles usually ends up being 3 to 5 hours of traveling time, depending on how flat and level the roads are. The throttle return springs on the Bounder also have a pretty high tension. So 3 to 5 hours is usually around the time that my leg and knee both start getting tired from holding down the accelerator. I do have cruise control on the Bounder, but I never use it since I like to be able to adapt quickly to changing road conditions. And actually, I'm not even entirely sure that the cruise control servo is functional, but yeah, I've never messed with it. Also, until very recently, my girlfriend drove our regular cars separately. That's a 04 Hyundai Sonata, just a basic mid-size sedan. Juggling the 2 cars, I think, pushed down the miles we could comfortably do. We just recently got set up with a tow dolly to pull our car. It's probably obvious to most, but towing the car is a major improvement. Though it does add complication to our move days. We have to carefully load and unload the tow vehicle and also make sure we don't drive the motorhome into a situation where we'll get stuck, since we can't back up very well with the tow dolly attached. Anyway, maybe we'll do some longer travel days in the future, but for now, we're still keeping them around 200 miles or less. Okay, number 6. What places do we tend to stay at? At the outset, I was interested in boondocking pretty much exclusively, mostly on Bureau of Land Management land. I wanted to get out there and have a bunch of space and not have to pay to camp. That is still my preference, but we find ourselves opting for paid camping much more frequently than I had expected, whether to be closer to stuff we want to see, to have hookups, to be able to troubleshoot plumbing or electrical systems, to be able to dump tanks more leisurely is sometimes nice, or simply to experience an interesting camping site. Also, Good boondocking options can be few and far between in the eastern United States. We're in southern Indiana right now, and the boondocking buffet has definitely come to an end. There are certainly still free places you can crash for a night if you need to. We've stayed over in rest areas a few times. They're loud because the semis you share the space with often idle their engines all night, but, well, some of them are kind of pleasant places, and when I just need a place to park it for a night, I tend not to feel too picky. We get our mail sent to a virtual mailbox service that collects the mail and then can send it wherever we happen to be. We use iPostal 1 and it's worked pretty well, but the thing is you need to have an address near where you physically are that you can get the mail sent to. We've sometimes used friends and families for this, but more commonly we've used general delivery at local post offices. General delivery is a service that some post offices offer where you can have your mail sent to a post office and then go pick it up. If you look up a post office on the USPS website, it'll say whether or not the post office will accommodate general delivery. However, we've found that what the website says isn't always consistent with what the post office will tell you if you call them. In the Southwest, pretty much every post office we contacted accommodated general delivery, and receiving mail went off without any hitch. But now that we've gotten into the eastern half of the country, things seem much spottier. We've called a bunch of post offices in different states, Mississippi, Alabama, and Indiana. Either post offices don't understand what general delivery is, or they say they don't do it, or they have a set of rules for how it has to be carried out. Or in one case, we had to talk with the postmaster to get permission to have mail sent for general delivery. It's possible we just got lucky in the Southwest and unlucky in the Southeast, but assuming there is something more than luck going on here, I'm not sure why there's a regional difference. It may be just more common for people to be living out west without an address to receive mail. It seems plausible to me, but I don't know for sure either way. Number 8, cost. Cost was a significant factor in our decision to become full-time RVers, so I wanted to say a word or two about it. In our case, going on the road full-time probably wasn't going to change our income situation, but it was going to remove the cost that we were paying in rent. And our rent cost was pretty high, so we figured the rig would eventually pay for itself and for its maintenance by saving us from having to shell out for rent every month, even granting that we would still pay some relatively small amount in camping fees, which is basically the RVing equivalent of rent. And so far, this has seemed to work out as expected. I think the more interesting question for me at this point is this: excluding rent entirely, to what extent does our RV lifestyle, when compared to our prior way of living, cost more, less, or the same? This is an interesting one for me because on the one hand, I think we probably spend less money on acquiring things since we simply don't have much space to keep a bunch of stuff around. And on the other hand, we do seem to spend more money on sightseeing, restaurants, the kind of stuff that would be a shame not to experience if you're in a new place. For the last few months, it seems like our costs, excluding rent, have been roughly the same as they were when we were renters. But I'm curious to see how things change over time. I suspect they may trend downwards slightly, since we had a lot of upfront gear and maintenance costs that might not be repeated anytime soon, but I really don't know for sure. I think the takeaway here is that if you have a situation sort of like ours, a somewhat thrifty RVing lifestyle can be financially advantageous, but costs of living expenses can always creep up, and there's always the possibility of major repair expenses coming out of the woodwork. Okay, so right from the start, we opted to use Starlink as our sole internet provider, aside from the limited internet that we already had through our cell phone plans. I think many people will know what Starlink is, but for those of you who don't, it's a satellite internet service from SpaceX. It's not exactly cheap. The basic satellite dish setup costs around $600 for the hardware, and the monthly service charge is around $150. However, compared to traditional consumer satellite internet, it's much more attainable and compelling. The other option really for mobile internet is cellular. The benefit that Starlink has over cellular is that it should be able to work wherever you happen to be, as long as the dish has a clear shot at the sky, without any need to worry about a cell signal. And for the last 4 months, while we've been principally in the southwestern US, Starlink has worked impressively well. The quality of the connection varied from place to place, but I can't recall a single time when we didn't get a usable internet connection. My girlfriend did video calls for work. I played video games with my friends thousands of miles away. I pretty much just worked. That said, about a week ago, Starlink stopped working altogether. I suspect it's an issue with the connection between the satellite dish and the cable that runs from it, since many other people on the internet have had problems with this. We contacted Starlink support, and over a week later, we're still waiting for a response. The last time I contacted them, I also had to wait a really long time before they got back to me. So I think that's just what it is. While we wait, we purchased a cellular internet plan through T-Mobile. It has worked pretty well. It's nice to not have to take down and set up the Starlink dish whenever we move. It's nice not to have to worry about getting the dish in a spot where it has an unobstructed view of the sky. And it's also nice that the cellular internet pulls much less power than Starlink. The real disadvantage, though, of the cellular internet is that it has significantly limited the places where we can camp, since we have to stay at places where we can have a cell signal. And it's sometimes kind of hard to tell ahead of time if a place will have a usable signal. I know that there's equipment out there to boost cell reception and otherwise improve the cellular internet experience, but I don't have any experience with this and can't speak to it. There's a ton of information out there on it, though, for those who are interested. So, assuming that Starlink, the company, does eventually fix our satellite dish, I think I would still go with Starlink if I had the chance to do it all over again. Despite the significant drawbacks, it really is nice to never have to worry about cell reception when picking campsites. And at least in the Southwest, it worked pretty well. I think some people get into RVing because they want to slow down and enjoy life a little more. I certainly think RVing can do that for you, but there's a lot of different ways to RV. While we've been doing this, time has flown like it never has before for me. But that's because I've gotten into this on the budget side of things, and I've chosen to fix more or less everything myself, while also devoting a substantial amount of time to working on documenting the experience in ways that are interesting to me. This is all great because I want to be doing this stuff, but I'm probably busier than I've ever been. The act of moving from campsite to campsite takes a good amount of time and effort, and if you add in other work on top of it, you can quickly start running out of hours in the day. That said, I certainly have found time to enjoy the places that I have been, and this kind of traveling lifestyle really is awesome if you're interested in observing animals and nature generally. I started out when we were first getting going by getting into bird watching a bit. Being out in an RV gives you a lot of great opportunities for watching birds and all sorts of animals, coyotes, jackrabbits, insects. It's interesting for me to see the different sorts of trees and plants too. I'm not too deep into any of this stuff, but having a reason to look a little bit more carefully at your surroundings is really nice. And in a somewhat similar way, it's been great to have a mountain bike along because it gives me a reason to go out and explore an area around where we are camped a little bit more. I haven't done much crazy off-road riding, just a modest amount, but I would highly recommend the bike as a way to really open up the experience, which is probably not news to any seasoned RVer because bikes are pretty much ubiquitous around RVs, but yeah, I'll say it anyway. Am I glad that I embarked on this adventure? Yes, I sure am. I've seen so much interesting stuff. I love driving this hulking old motorhome and hearing the growl of the Cummins diesel engine. If you look at the photos I put up on my Instagram, you'll see the beautiful landscapes that we've gotten to experience. And if you check out some of the stuff I've written about on my blog, you might get a sense of the adventure involved in the situations that we've gotten into. And all that's true, but to the extent someone out there watching this is in a similar spot to the one I was in a few months ago and is thinking about taking the plunge, I feel like I ought to paint the full picture. I think the positive aspects of this way of living are a bit more obvious than the trade-offs. Some of these trade-offs can probably be paved over by money. Even if you like fixing stuff like I do, the amount of work involved in maintaining an RV can be a little overwhelming for a novice DIYer like myself. That said, for those with the funds, you can always choose to opt out of this aspect to the extent that you want to. Stuff on a newer rig will still break, but maybe not as much. And if you don't mind paying someone to fix things, that's always an option. However, there are some other drawbacks that you can't really spend your way out of. I guess everyone's different, but for me at least, traveling is tiring. And since I've been doing it all the time, I've sort of gotten used to it, but it's still exhausting. It can be hard to get into good routines, and sometimes I get sick of the many little inconveniences. Sometimes I just wish I could get my internet from a wire and my water from a pipe in the ground. It would make things easier. Also, it can be hard to get that safe and cozy feeling that you can find if you live in a nice home long enough. When we're parked in a vacant parking lot a mile back in the woods with no one else around, that's peaceful and cool, but it can also be a little creepy. But then there are the positive points, and there are many of them. It's awesome living your daily life in beautiful and varied places. It's a really cool combination between normal day-to-day living and permanent vacation. It's great to be able to easily go hiking, driving, biking to extraordinary places that are right nearby. It's fun to interact with different people from all over the country. And our RV has just about all the modern conveniences that I personally want. It's also been a blast to get to use a bunch of cool gear to tackle the elements. So in short, as advertised, it has been a true avenue to both fun and adventure and freedom. Well, that's what I've got for now. These are the thoughts of someone who's been doing this for 4 months, which is both a decent chunk of time and not very much time at all. I'm going to keep cruising the country and living the life, so I'm certain I'll have more to say in the near future. I hope you all found this useful or interesting in some way. For now, this is Jeff signing off.